Real happy to have the next gentleman on the Sports Card Shop guest line. He's a writer, a content creator in his own right. He does the Alt podcast. He writes for Sports Collectors Daily, and he's one of the newest members of Danny Black's venture that I'm sort of helping him with, and that's Hobby News Daily. Without further ado, welcome Horacio Ruiz. Welcome.
John, thank you for having me, man. Is what an intro, man. That was great. Glad to come on and talk to you. I know we were talking a little bit before we started the recording, and what a great story you were telling, man. You got some great stories, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's I've been fortunate. Like I did it. I actually did a couple shows some months back where I kind of shared about 10 stories of different things that have happened with sports. You know, uh, I was one win away from the Little League World Series, and Jason Varitek's team actually beat us, and he hit a home run off me. I was the losing pitcher in the game. I know I told you the Orestes Destrade story where he came over my house, ate some dinner with us, and we got him back to the hotel. Gave me a bat, and years later had it signed. I got the bat against John Franco. I've been I guess, very blessed to have some of those great stories. Seem a lot of them seem to revolve around baseball, and it's fun to kind of share those. But you're the guest, so we're going to talk about what you do. You know, talk about you're a dad. I know you got young kids, and I always say on this show it's easy for me. I have a 23-year-old, so I used to coach varsity sports, and podcasting sort of replaced that when I stepped away from that. But with young kids, how do you balance what you do, hobby wise, content wise, writing, and being a dad, a husband, and all that fun stuff? How do you manage that? I guess.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, and sometimes I kind of I should stop and wonder, ask myself the same thing because I don't know if there's such thing as balancing. It's just kind of getting through,
Yeah.
taking it day by day. But I will say, like, one of the biggest things, whether it's writing or getting a podcast done, is and it goes back to what they taught us when we were younger. I mean, in high school, is like time management, right? It's something that you really learn when you are in college, and maybe that's probably like one of the biggest skills I learned in college. Um, after that first semester of freshman year, you kind of realize I need to do a better job of studying, of going to bed early, and being a responsible student. And so I kind of carried that into adulthood for the most part. For the most part. So what that means is, like, what that might look like is, my oldest son now, he's 7 years old, but he's really getting into hockey. So
Yeah.
we're going to the rink, and he's doing his little practices, and he's got some games. And so what I'll do is I'll bring my laptop, for example, and during the practice I will be sit down and do some brainstorming or some writing, shoot off some emails, and then for his game I'll shut it down and watch him play. So that way I'm
Yeah.
not missing him playing and seeing him kind of doing what he enjoys doing. So it really it's a great question. Luckily, I have to give 100% credit to my wife as well. Without a great partner, without somebody there supporting you and helping you out, it wouldn't be possible. And she's busy in her own right. She also works, but we make it happen. You know, so
Yep, yep. We got a good partnership, and same here. My wife's not a hobby person, and my son's older, so that also helps. But she's very supportive of things I do, and that's always nice when you have that stability and support. And again, kudos to you for sort of juggling those things and making all that happen. And you're excellent. It's one thing to do it and then to be excellent at it on top of that. So, kudos to you there. I want to touch on, I know we talked, like you said, but before we hit record, last year's National Atlantic City was your first one. I've only been to four or five, so it's not like I'm a grizzled veteran, but I remember my first one, which was in Chicago. I think 2017. I could be off a year, but talking about your experience there, the first one. kind of, going in, not, I'm sure people told you what it was going to be like, do this, here's what tips and all that. But until you actually go and attend and, kind of your perspective, your first national last year in Atlantic City.
It was amazing. I live on Staten Island, so I'm about, I'd say,
Yeah.
about 2 hours away from Atlantic City. So I was amped the entire way driving down. I was just going by myself. Um, and, blasting the radio. Just remember, I have these memories of just being like, what's this?
Yeah.
What is the national going to look like? How am I going to react to a giant convention of just trading cards? And um, I really enjoyed it. Just even just entering the convention center, striking up conversations with people. A couple of guys just started talking to me. What are you here for? Here to buy or sell? I was like, I'm looking to buy a couple things. Oh yeah, me too. They kind of shared with me what they had already bought. I think I went on the second day or the third day. I think it was the third day. So I was only there for a day, um, because of other obligations
Yeah.
that we talked
Yeah.
about before. But when I entered, man, it just smacks you in the face. How big it is, and I kind of just like stood still for a second. I kind of walked in, looked at a couple of booths, and then realized that I was gonna have to walk around for a little while to really soak it all in. Um, and there were a couple of things. I Before going, I was like, should I go get autographs from the signings that they had? Should I go check out the all the different booths? And so I decided just kind of take my time, checked out what was out there, struck up some conversations with different dealers. A couple people kind of just stick out. I remember talking to, I don't know why, but Brian Kong. He's an artist. He had his booth there, and we talked for a little while, and gave me his card, and I still have it, and I want to commission something at some point. It's real cool that a guy like him is doing that. And then I also just remember the breaker side, right, which was kind of new, and the crazy energy there, and just kind of walking through and feeling that, and so I have a really fond memory of it. I know a lot of people weren't too enthusiastic about it being in Atlantic City. Me not staying there, I didn't really that didn't matter to me. But the
Yeah.
show itself was just amazing. You know.
Yeah, for me, I'm in Syracuse. I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York, but I'm now in Syracuse. Anytime you can drive to the National, which I obviously did last year, that's a nice perk
Yeah.
to have. And the venue itself, like the convention center itself. I know that was your first one. Some of the other ones are definitely tighter, Ruiz. You're more elbow to elbow with
Mhm.
people. It's hard to get in front of a table to see all the stuff that dealers have available. Atlantic City was more wide open, so I liked. I know the city's doesn't have the greatest rap in the world. It's got a bad rap, and some of the areas around the convention center are probably not where you'd look to buy a house if you were moving to Atlantic City. I'll be polite and say it, that way. But the venue itself, the convention center itself, I felt like there's more breezeway. You didn't feel like you had to like box out like you were playing basketball to get in front of a showcase, and that's always nice because in other some of the other ones, this people will like the city better, and you have like Chicago this year. You got events happening outside of the national sporting events. You got White Sox, Cubs, and other things, and but it's definitely a tighter fit. So that it's a trade-off, I guess. I like the fact I could drive. When you drive, obviously you can bring more stuff than if you're going on an airplane where you're limited to how many bags you can bring and all that fun stuff. So I don't mind it. I didn't mind it as much as other people. I've heard rumors that it probably won't be in Atlantic City again. So that perk of getting to drive there might not happen again. So you kind of enjoy it while you can. We don't know. We don't know. There's some new leadership with the national. Maybe there will be one. Another one. Maybe not Atlantic City itself, but maybe another venue where both can drive again wherever that may wind up being, hopefully, right? And so, yeah, and it's funny, the first one, everyone tells you what to expect, what it's going to be like, and then you get in there, and it's even bigger than you envisioned in your own mind. Like you kind of get revved up for it. You think from talking to people. Here's what you do, Horatio, and then you get in there, and it's like whoosh, like you said, and like where do I start? How do I, especially if you're only going to be there a day, I want to try to cover as much ground as I can because I'm only here for the day. Can be a little overwhelming, but it's fun, right? It's we circle it every year. It's just something we'd like to do and go to, and I call it the Super Bowl, the hobby, right? It's a week long event, almost like the Super Bowl is. Everyone, almost everybody from the hobby is there or tries to get there, and it's much like the Super Bowl, and it's fun times. It's I've heard it called the family reunion, where you get to see friends and maybe meet someone for the first time, maybe meet people again, and hopefully, I know we talked. Maybe you can get to Chicago and obviously meet up there as well. But it's a great event, and I think it's going to be better and better as the hobby. It's become an event. It used to be a giant card show, and now it's really become a major hobby event. So it's really, really taken a life of its own.
Yeah, I really, I enjoyed the just the different parts of it, not just the cards, but like also where they had the different auction houses had the different, game used uniforms. They had them on display,
Yep.
like a little mini museum area. And then you got to see just everything from modern players, Giannis jerseys to like older baseball players. I'm kind of blanking on who exactly was there, but the
Yeah.
uniforms they
Yeah.
had were, from the early 20th century. So that was cool. And then, people selling bats, um, people selling different thing, magazines, different things that, that you just don't see in a regular show necessarily, right? Most regular shows you see, basically cards, and then you might see a little bit of something else. But here you had, a little bit of everything. So um, that was cool. I kind of wish the one thing I wish is a couple of things like to do it right. I feel like you should stay a couple of days, at least 2 days
Yeah.
to really kind of to do it right. Just to kind of get the feel for it. Would have loved to, experience maybe got together with a couple of people at night and just hang out and talk cards
Yeah.
or whatever. Um, so that's one thing, and then the other thing is it just struck me like the vendors were great. Always willing to talk to you. If you had a question, they'd be willing to help you. So it was just a good time. It was a good time. And the third thing,
Yeah.
actually, I had more money to spend on certain things, but you have
Yeah, I think we all check that box too,
yeah,
Horatio. I always joke, right? Anytime you're at a card show and there's big buff guys with nice suits and a weapon you cannot see, protected $1 million items, it's serious. It's serious business. So,
yeah. The mantle was there.
what's that?
The
Yeah, the
mantle
man.
was there.
Yeah, yeah,
The
yep.
25.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
no doubt. I think that was the talk of. It seems like every national too. There's a sort of a big headline. I think that was obviously
yeah.
last year's, and we'll see what this year will bring. And always fun. You're a vintage guy like myself, and I get this question. It's hard to answer, right? People ask, "What's vintage? Like what year?" Like when does it stop being vintage? I kind of use the 40-year rule. I think if something's 40 years old, it's vintage. But at this point, it's 2023. So based on that rule, 1983 cards, are vintage. Now I do think they are sort of vintage. And some will argue I don't think 83 tops baseball or what or is vintage. So I'll ask you, right? I always ask someone who's in the vintage like me, how do you define? And there's no wrong answer here, right? That's the beauty of this question. People will argue with you, but there really is no argument. It's a personal definition. So if asking you what is vintage, how do you answer that?
Oh, not a year set, but to me, the vintage is always evolving. So I guess that's the
Yeah,
best way I can put it. So like you said, 1983. You said that's 40 years, without a doubt that's vintage, right? If something's something has that much history, um, and I guess and I don't label it this way, but you know, if people are uncomfortable with putting 83 in the same bucket as say 1910, 1906, these different years that were big for cards. I mean, at that point, you're talking about now we can label those antiques almost, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you've got antiques, you got vintage. But I was thinking about this the other day, and I heard I was listening to Nirvana on the radio, and I realized that the song "The Smells Like Teen Spirit." I don't know if it was that
yeah,
song specifically, but it was Nirvana, and that song was 30 years old now. 30 years
yeah,
old. So, and I remember vividly listening to that as a kid and thinking,
yeah,
how modern it is, and it still sounds modern to me, right?
yeah,
30 years old.
yeah,
And then and people do talk about this a lot, but like in the year 2000, which I remember quite clearly as well, you know 30 years ago was 1970, and 1970 compared to 2000 seems like ages ago. And with everything
yeah.
that was going on in the 70s, and fast forward 30 years later, and I'm kind of experiencing that same thing. So as I'm relating it back to this, like vintage is always, it's Nirvana's vintage now,
Yeah.
and what was once modern is eventually going to be vintage. So I think anything that brings back memories, it's been around for a while, and kind of has a different style, why not? That qualifies to me.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's a great answer. Like I said, there is no wrong answer, but I do love your answer. And I'm an older guy. I'm older than you, so it's scary now using my own sort of 40-year-old rule logic, that it's scary. Some of the stuff that would qualify as vintage with that rule, I've actually opened. I was around to open on like its day of release. You know what I mean? Like you think about 65 tops. I was born in 72, so I didn't open that obviously when it was actually I never opened it. Right? It was by that point
Yeah.
it was too expensive or not readily available. But now stuff using again, that's my age kicking in, stuff that with that 40-year rule being 50, I'm like, I opened that the first day it hit the shelves, and yet I might still consider it vintage. So maybe I guess when someone says, how old are you, John, rather than tell them my exact age, which I'm not shy about. I sort of, it is what it is, right? Can't change. It's the only way, one way to stop getting old. I'm not a fan of that way. So, I might just say, hey, I'm vintage, and get a couple laughs, that way. But people get like fired up with that question, like, and we'll debate intensely, and have their own sort of rules, and that's the beauty of the question. Is really, it's really up to you, right? It doesn't change anything. 80, even if you don't believe 83 tops is vintage, it's still 83 tops. It still has Gwynn and Boggs rookies in it. That equation is standard. That doesn't change, right? So, and two Hall of Famers right there. So, I think to debate when people like really get it like fired up about it, I don't really get entertain it on that level, because we should be happy, right? We should not make it like, I'm right, and you're wrong. So, and there is no really, even someone that says it's 83 isn't, with my 40. I'm not gonna. That's to you. It isn't to me. It is, and we can just. It's all right to disagree and still enjoy the hobby at the same time. So I don't get in the middle of those. But I always like to ask somebody who is kind of is classified as a vintage collector, how they define it, just to get sort of the different perspectives. Um,
Yeah.
you know,
Well,
uh,
yeah.
yeah. Go ahead.
Think about that. I mean, you bring up the Gwynn and Boggs, and those are players that kids right now, 10, 11, 12-year-old kids, they're coming up in the hobby, that they have no clue about, right? And
Yeah,
they shouldn't, because, and so these are cards now that you can use to kind of help educate kids about the greats
yeah,
of the game, and at that point, it's almost like the big debate now for me that I'm kind of in tune with, and I think it's pointless, but still, like, who's the GOAT, LeBron James or Michael Jordan, right? And listen, I'm a Jordan guy through and through. The reason I love
same here.
basketball in the '90s
Same
was
here.
because of Jordan.
Yep.
Um, but you know, people say James, And 9 times out of 10, the people that say LeBron, it's not because that they're wrong. I mean, that is their GOAT. But
Yep.
they maybe also didn't see Jordan play, and
Yep.
so maybe they just weren't around to see the greatness, right? Like how great he truly was, and it's a thing where you have to educate them and be like, well, just look at the highlights. Let's talk about what this man
Yeah.
accomplished and how he did it. So like I said, every era, every generation has their thing, and it's always important though to like look a few years back and acknowledge that there are some great players that came before them. You
Yeah,
know,
no doubt. And we are seeing, one thing as a dealer, I still set up at shows as a dealer. I still go to shows as a consumer, obviously too. I'm seeing, and this always warms my heart, Horatio. I'm starting to see a lot more younger kids in the hobby actually start to learn about the history, not just of the hobby, but the history of sports. And some of the players they weren't around yet to see. They're taking an interest. They're going
yeah,
back and finding out the incredible hitter Gwynn was, and the fact he rarely struck out, and all the crazy stats. If he went 0 for 300, he'd still if he came back and went 0 for 300, he'd still have a lifetime batting average of over 300, and all those crazy stats. Maddox rarely walking someone or even having 3-2 counts on people. You're starting to see a lot of young kids, young adults, even that weren't around yet, uh, to find that stuff out and sort of collect those players and learn more about them. I always love seeing that. Like you, I'm an old '80s, '90s basketball fan. I was more fan of the NBA then than today. I'm a Jordan in that debate. I'm Team Jordan on that side of the aisle. I always like to just point out there was no load management in the '80s, in the
yeah,
'90s, right? You got guys playing with the flu, being sick, little broken bones here and there that you don't necessarily see as much today. It's different. It's hard to compare. You know, uh, the game changes and the players change, but I'm old school to a fault. I'll admit it. And those guys, you hear those guys talk even today. It bothers them, right? You hear Jordan said, hey, I know people are traveling all over to come see me play. If I can get out there, so I got the flu, right? I can sleep after the game's over, go back to my hotel and crash. But for that kid who's coming to see me, I almost owe it to him, right? And we don't see that in the same vein as much in today's. And it bothers me a little bit. Nothing I can do about it, but it's still I'm glad I got to watch those players that had that sort of mentality, no days off. That's what the off season is about. But it is what it is. And like you said, someone who didn't grow up with Jordan, they don't realize that. Even though the Last Dance highlighted a lot of stuff, and so many people watched that. It's one thing to watch that, and it's one thing like me and you, we saw that live
yeah.
every almost every night, and even watching the show, it doesn't do the same justice as seeing it in real time. And so I get it. I don't get into debates. I just kind of fall on that side of the aisle, and I was a bigger basketball fan back in the heyday, but still a great sport. And we know what it hobby wise, it's still right up there. Probably one or two as far as what people collect, and so I don't besmirch it. It's still a great sport, and so I'll ask you this: to being a vintage guy, it's a question I get too. Is someone who's kind of maybe not new to the hobby, but hey, I want to start collecting more vintage stuff. What's your advice to someone who says, "Hey, I'm not necessarily new to the hobby, but I sort of want to backtrack." What advice, what kind of advice do you give in those kind of situations?
I mean, the only advice I can give, right, is kind of what I did with when it came to vintage. And number one, I'm going to be 100% transparent, was what I could afford. And then number two was what I liked, like visually liked.
Yep.
And that's kind of where I started. And so the very, believe it or not, the first card that I really the first series that I really fell in love with was this 1933 Gaudi Indian Gum series,
Yep.
and because they were cheap, I could get these cards for, in some cases, $5-6, for nicer condition ones, 20-25 bucks. And the colors popped. I mean, if you've ever seen the 1933 Gaudi baseball cards, you kind of understand what I'm talking about, right? Like the colors just popped, and so that's when I started collecting. And then on top of that, the cards were very sort of informational. Now there's some, I stopped collecting the series because there are some things that are, some of the stuff wasn't the way that they're describing some of the tribes and things like that. I kind of got a little uncomfortable with. Doesn't take away from the beauty of the cards, or the historic part of it. It's a depiction of native life, a depiction of people that used to live here. Um, and so that also kind of attracted me to it. And it's
Yep.
funny because in some ways the cards were very revered the people, and then in some other cards, it was funny what they would write in the back. It was just completely like racist and everything. So it's just like
Yep.
just a weird, funky set. Um, so the advice I would give is that you don't have to go in with $1,000, $2,000 to collect vintage. That's the beauty of it. In fact,
Yep.
that's 33. You could 1950s, 1960s. You see all these sale threads. Whatever you want to buy is there for a couple of bucks.
Yep.
If you really enjoy it. Now, another big part of that is also nostalgia. So like, vintage is changing. Vintage, like I said, is evolving. So to me, the toys that I grew up playing with, and this kind of taking it away from the cards just for a second, like to me, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and the GI Joes that I played with when I was 7, 8, they're dear to me. I don't have them anymore. But when I see them somewhere and have an opportunity to maybe scoop up a couple that are in good shape, um, I'll do that because they mean something to me. They
Yep.
remind me of my childhood, um, and I'm not letting that go very easily, right? I mean, I treasure that. It's just something that reminds me of me as a kid, and I have 3 boys, and I hope that
Yep.
somehow we can recreate those memories with them with different things, different toys of this era. Um, so that's also a big component of it. Is to me was you can get in cheaply with vintage. And then the other component of that was, what? And I'm also going to collect things that mean something to me, that remind me of when I was a kid, or things that I'm not going to let go and just flip for a profit. So
Yep. More than dollar signs, right? More definitely
yeah,
more than dollar signs, right? The old adage is, right, with your collection, right? Collect stuff where if everything just crashed to zero value, you'd still be happy owning it, right? And I think you sort of epitomize that with what you say, how you collect, and the nostalgia and stuff that means, brings you back to a day we can't really go back. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that, right? So the next best thing is stuff like that to reminisce and kind of, at least in our mind, go back there, like you said, with your own boys. Like, hey, this, when your dad was your age, this was like the big thing, and sort of build those bonds and those conversations, and
yeah,
that sort of thing. And then they'll be doing the same as they become adults, right? And that's always, you can't put a price on that stuff, and you really shouldn't put a price on that stuff. And I love when people talk about it, because I'm the same way. I do have expensive cards, but some of those 10, 15, $20 purchases have even more of a story, truthfully, attached to them than maybe some of the more expensive stuff that I may, own, whether it be part of my show inventory or even part of my PC, right? And it's important you said that, and I appreciate that. And we've seen the market sort of reset. We've seen prices come down, even on those bigger ticket items. That crescendo, that boom that was, right. That's calmed down now. I mean, the pandemic's not over per se, but it's sort of post pandemic here. We've seen stuff relax and come down. It's a great opportunity even to get, there was some stuff that, during that crescendo that really became out of reach for folks, myself included, that now you look at it and it's back in sort of a reasonable range where if you wanted to save a few bucks and say, hey, a year and a half ago, I wouldn't even search that on an auction site or selling platform because I knew I wasn't in the market for it. Now times are a little bit different now. I might be able to pull the trigger on a purchase like that and look at it and maybe shop for some deals and see to get the best deal you can, right? And that's always, when people always say, "Oh man, prices are way down," and I'm a seller too. I get it, but there's a positive in that. I've bought stuff recently that prior I wouldn't have even looked for, right? Because I'm
Yeah.
not gonna, So you got it. There's a silver lining in every scenario, and as a dealer, I go with where the market's at, and that's just the way it is. It was a nice year and a half run. Let's to be 100% transparent, but all good things come to an end, and it's not even good. It's still good things, right? It's just a different scenario, and
Yeah.
I think it's better. I think it's made the hobby more affordable again for more people. And we still have our high end, as you well know, for those people who play in that space, and then nothing wrong with that, right? They don't have to apologize for it, and we don't have to feel bad. But I like, this is the time of the hobby where you can still find some great deals. And again, things go up and down. That's economics 101. And so some of the fun is buying stuff now that you kind of feel like, hey, I want this, but I also feel like it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? I also feel like this is going to go up again at some point, whenever that might not be tomorrow or next year, but maybe in a couple years. But it's a great opportunity to get it now. And even if it doesn't do that, even if it does, I still enjoy it. I still want to own it. It's in my collection either way. And that's a great. So whenever I hear people kind of complaining about where the market's at, I always try to point out there's pluses and minuses to everything, right? Even during that crescendo, right? There were some people that we all liked. A lot of people liked it, but some people got sort of turned off and maybe left too. Like
Yeah.
I can't. So there's always pros and cons, and you just kind of adapt and go with the flow, and kind of your thoughts on where the market is now too, especially vintage wise.
I kind of wanted, you mentioned being a dealer, and I think one of the other things about vintage is, um, another piece of advice I'd give is, because I've done it recently, is go to local card shows, because the connections that you make there are unbelievable. So, like, people looking for deals. You go on eBay, you send out offers, or you're stocking sort of like this auction. But you'll often find that if you can make some connections, within your community, by going to
Yep.
local card show, um, you get some great deals from guys. Once you
Yep.
kind of get to know them, you're buying from them regularly. Um, Very generous. So that's one of those things. And I'm noticing that as the market has kind of kind of relaxed a little bit, I guess you could say. Uh, there's a local card show here on Staten Island once a month. It's like sparsely attended, but these guys are there because they love the cards.
Yep.
They love to talk shop, and I make it a point once a month to show up and spend a couple bucks there, and they love having people there and just talking to and being able to sell some cards and move some inventory. And that's where I've gotten some really good deals from them, just because they know me, and that's one way to maybe potentially build a vintage set, from a vintage
Yep.
card dealer that they might have some stuff. As far as the market, yeah, I agree. I mean, everyone sees, we're in a weird time right now. We talk about whether or not still we officially haven't hit a recession, whether we're in a recession. Without a doubt, there is inflation. Things are perking up, just everyday items. But then you see numbers like the unemployment numbers kind of going up, or the number of jobs being added going up. And I think that we have to pay attention to I guess, a broader market, not be an expert in economics, because I'm far from it. But if you pay attention to those markers, really, every other market's going to follow suit, right? So
Yep.
I think everyone's being very careful right now. I guess that's the best way to put it. And you know, I think that some people that would typically be sellers, or maybe or let's say buyers, or maybe waiting a little longer because they think like, maybe I could save a couple bucks on these cards. And people that are trying to just make sure that they're liquid, a little more liquid, have some cash. They're probably looking to sell right now as well because, hey, what if the prices do drop? And there's always that euphoria that was here in the space about a year and a half ago is definitely gone. And so people need to really start thinking about, about that. But in terms of the hobby, right, in terms of collecting, um listen, if you're not over leveraged, if you have disposable income that you can spend on some cards without, getting kicked out of your home, or without, you're still going to eat at night, you're going to provide for your family. um I think that's still alive and well, right? Like, I think that that
Yep.
collectors are going to collect, hobbyists enjoy getting things. It's just a matter of really, not getting carried away, you know.
Yeah, being smart, right? Yeah, I think one of the to me, the one of the bad things about that boom period we're talking about, that 1.5 years that we sort of kind of all agree on, was the bad part of it was you didn't and I hate to say it like this, and I don't mean any, disrespect on anyone. You didn't have to be the brightest hobbyist to sort of make money. It was sort of like the Midas touch, right? No, just in general, right? Myself included, right? Everything seemed to be going up two, three, four, even more times. New wax, you could buy it, when it first come out, and in 3 days it was going to be double or triple or maybe even more than that. It was just real easy. As long as you could get it, you were going to make money on it. What we're seeing now is now, if that's your mo, if that's what it's not as easy. You got to do your homework. You got to do your research, and I think I think that's a good thing, right? I think that's a good thing. So, like you
Yeah.
said, if you're just in the hobby because you solely 100% enjoyment, it's a great time. The stuff is more affordable. If you're in there, you're the quick buck guy and not maybe in it for the long haul. Now you got to do a little more homework and sort of earn your paycheck, so to speak. So it's sort of leveled the playing field, I say. And I don't think I think that's a good thing. I mean, some other people might say, man, I liked it when it was just easy to, quadruple my money. Sure. I think we all would agree with that, but we all, people who've been in the hobby a long time knew that wasn't going to stay like that too. So, I think it's just par for the course. And, you know, uh, people think I'm nuts, but I like it now. The boom. Listen, I've made money doing shows when shows kind of came back, and I was a benefactor of it. I'm not trying to bite the hand that feeds me, so to speak, but I like both aspects because I'm not going to be in the hobby no matter what, right? I'm going to enjoy the hobby whether it's booming or it's kind of settled down to what we know it now, and I'll adapt to each scenario. Someone who's not as going to be in it for the long haul probably wouldn't necessarily agree. So you just got to go with the flow, adapt, and like you said, I think it's perfect, right? When it comes to your own hobby, right? Have stuff that you know, if it's worth money, great. But even if everything went to the zero count, right, you still enjoy owning that piece of cardboard, chrome, or memorabilia, whatever it may be. And I think if you fit that bill, I think you'll be happy in either scenario, right? And I kind of that's where I fall. I don't want to speak for you, but I think you do as well. So for those folks right now is okay too. For some others, might not agree exactly the same, but that's where we're at. I want to talk about another aspect that I've started to dabble in. It's gotten harder to acquire these because more people are starting to look at them and buy them, and it's tickets, right? And
Mhm.
I really sort of love tickets, right? Because I'm a little bit older than you, but I'm you're from the general same time period, right? When we would go to a sporting event, Horatio, right? The ticket was just the vessel to get through that turnstile to get into the sporting event or concert or whatever it is we were attending, right? And find our seat where did that ticket go? Right? We might crumple it up, put it in our pocket for the night, and then when we get home, what happens? Right? Game's over, show's over, and it might work its way into the trash. But we've seen the rise of tickets, and I've said on this show, like tickets are, I think, in a way, more rarer than certain cards because they were at the time they weren't viewed as collectibles in the same way cards were. I mean, even back in the 50s and 60s, cards were rubber bands thrown around, put in bike spokes, but they still had a trading aspect to them. Kids traded them and collected them. They wanted to get all their favorite team, their favorite player. No one was really keeping tickets. Maybe they had a box they threw it in, but kind of forgot about. So very little tickets survive in comparison to cards, and I think you're seeing people sort of go to that. Maybe they have all the cards of a certain player, the run, and now they're like, I'll just use Ted Williams for example, just off the top of my head. I have every Ted Williams tops card that they made, but now I want to have Ted Williams first game ticket. I want to have Ted Williams 400th home run game ticket. Now it's going to cost you, but they've become collectibles like they never have been before. We're seeing obviously they're graded. PSA's been grading them for a while now. Beckett just announced they're going to start grading them as well. They've become a collectible asset, much like the cards, and some people sort of pivoted from cards to tickets or do both at the same time. And I'm a Jackie Robinson guy, being a Brooklyn kid, and trying to even acquire a ticket to a game involving Jackie Robinson is difficult because they're bringing you know quite a bit of money, as they should, right? I'm not I someone asked me what would your dream ticket be, and that's obviously would be Jackie Robinson's debut as a Major League Baseball player. Unless I win the Powerball or the Mega Millions, I'll never own that, right? But you always dream, right? We've seen tickets really rise in stature. I think they always were sort of under the current, quiet, but now I think they've really starting to make a lot more noise. And you're seeing, the last national. I don't know if you saw. I know you were there for the day, but I saw two or three setups that's all they were. That's all they had was ticket. Darren Ravel, that's his setup is all tickets. He's got some
Yeah.
crazy stuff like tickets to the Titanic that got you
Yeah.
on the Titanic. Like
Yeah.
it's always concert tickets are a huge thing. Just from what you do with all and just in the hobby, sort of your take on where the ticket market is and sort of the quick rise. It's so quick that I thought I was getting in a little early, and it was almost too late even then. So, just your take on tickets.
Yeah, I mean, my take, initially I was I'm gonna admit it, pretty dismissive of it. In terms of, you know, you know, what value do the tickets have? I mean, how many of them are there? Um, but when you talk about, and there's always a but, right? When you talk about Jackie Robinson's debut, you're not talking about a ticket anymore. You're talking about American history, right?
Yeah. Yep.
When you're talking about historic boxing matches, or when you're talking about even the Titanic, again, that's world history.
Yeah.
There's no disputing those are artifacts that are tremendously valuable. So, and I mentioned this. I talked to Danny on Danny's podcast at the National, and I was there looking for cards, football card, vintage football cards, vintage baseball cards, building a couple sets slowly, and I came upon two tickets from the 1986 World Series. You and I are
Yep.
both fans, and
Yep.
I saw Game 6 and Game 7 tickets, and uh, I couldn't resist. Now I could
Nothing crazy happened in Game 6. I don't know why. I
so
don't know why that.
well, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure I don't know how much the audience know, but 86. Mookie Wilson with the Buckner ball.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
Mets were dead. The Mets were dead. And this really a miracle. The Miracle Mets.
Yeah.
I saw the documentary that they had on ESPN. I don't know if you got to watch that.
Yeah. Yep.
Um,
Yep.
and so in '86 I was 3 years old, right?
Yeah.
So I had no idea that they were down to their last strike with nobody on base,
Yeah.
down by two 3 runs. I don't know, but uh, it's a miracle that they won that game. So I bought the ticket, but I also it wasn't just because it was for me as a Mets fan, it had a meaning. I literally like when I held the ticket, right? Because I was like, am I gonna buy a ticket? Am I actually gonna do this? Um when I held the ticket, I told them like I got like a little shiver.
Yeah.
Because it's like me in '86, I wasn't even in the United States, okay? I wasn't living in the United States. I was
Yeah.
somewhere else. This was like a way for me to um almost connect to that moment in time.
Connect.
And
I was gonna
I'm
use
not
the word connect.
yeah,
Yeah.
it sounds weird, it sounds crazy. And at
No.
that point, I was like,
Me.
I have to buy this ticket. Um,
Yeah.
and so I've looked at them. I've looked at it differently. I would like to buy um, a couple of tickets. For me, the way I would approach it, or I'm gonna approach it is uh, games or teams that had meaning to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
That I grew up watching. Some of the we talked some Marlins teams, even some Mets teams, some players that I
Yeah.
really grew up with. One of my favorite players of all time. He's not a Mets. Dontrell Willis.
Yeah.
Um, and that season that the Marlins had about 20 years ago now, or 15 years ago. Um, Something like that is something that I'd look to kind of buy just because of what it means to me. Um, that's where I'm at with tickets.
Yeah, I agree. It is a connection, whether you were there or not. Just as a fan of that team, that player, that moment, even the moment itself, right? And honestly, not many of those tickets survive, right? Like people who walked out of Game 6, who like you said, the Mets were dead. People were crying. I was 14, and I thought it was over, and I was a ball player, right? And all of a sudden, we all know what happens. We don't,
Yeah,
and but people didn't keep like maybe someone went home and threw it in like a box or something, forgot about it. But no one, everyone that was ecstatic as a Mets fan didn't keep their ticket thinking someday this going. We're just happy, those that were there are just happy. Hey, we're surviving another day. We can still win the World Series, right? No one was thinking about the ticket. And years later, like 35,000 people, I would probably venture a safe guess 85% of those tickets didn't survive. They're in landfills and long gone 37 years later now, right? And so
yeah,
those tickets to me, that's why I go with the whole. I think tickets in some senses and on many levels are harder to find than cards. Because think of number one, there's a set amount produced, right? For the people who attended the game. Many people just threw them out, crumpled them up, and think how many didn't even survive the week or the night. Uh, People weren't even, people might beat up their cards, but they were kind of keeping them, right?
yeah.
Tickets were a whole weren't viewed as a long term like
Yeah.
momentum, right?
And even
Us,
yeah, the one thing I thought about was the tickets have the section and the row in them.
yeah,
If you go back, to say a specific moment in time, hypothetically speaking, where that ticket came from in that moment,
yeah,
right? Or
yeah,
during that game. So,
yeah,
I could look back and I haven't done it. I haven't done it. I could look back and see where that ticket was in Shea Stadium
yeah,
in that moment, and then I could maybe even look at some old highlight reels and kind of
and see
trace
that
it back to
person potentially
that.
or the
Yeah,
general area. Yeah, it's crazy. I think I've started to try to get into it. Stuff's going a little bit more than I anticipated or hoped, where I've sort of not got a lot yet, but I still look. It's still in my search thing, and you never know, right? You just got to come. You never know what you find, and unless you look, and I think it's sort of it's fun. It's even fun to hunt and search, right? The journey to try to
yeah,
acquire it. And now that you own that game 6 ticket, right, you can always look at it and just think, of what it meant to the Mets at that point, right? They were on the ropes and pretty much about to be counted out, and we all know what happened, and Red Sox fans aren't fond of that ticket or that moment, but they got their World Series titles later on, so
Oh,
I
they
won't
sure did.
cry. I won't cry for them too much. But for a Mets fan, right? It was 80.
Yeah.
It was 69, and even that was not supposed to really happen. So there's very significant, connection value, even intrinsically, with something like that, and I think it's a great thing. Speaking of Mets, let's kind of close on that note. We both grew up with the Wilpon era, where they really were very cheap and didn't sign people and made
They
some bad moves and had
they
some
weren't cheap,
triple A.
John.
Yeah,
John.
had
Yeah,
yeah
they weren't.
had
They
some
weren't
triple.
cheap with Bobby Bonilla. They weren't cheap with Bobby Bonilla.
Yeah, no, they're still paying him. That guy doesn't have to ever work again. Uh, you know, uh, and that we can talk about. We could do a whole show on the Bobby Bonilla deal. And but I remember one year, not that far long ago, where I looked at the lineup card and I'm like, this is. I'm in Syracuse and we have they weren't the Mets yet. They are now the AAA Mets. I'm like, we have a better AAA team here than the Mets have on the major league field. Those days, thankfully, are over. I wasn't sure they ever would end. It was tough being a Mets fan during the Wilpon era. I don't like to dislike people heavily, but the Wilpons pictures made it onto my dartboard on more than one occasion. Now we have the Cohen era, night and day, as you well know, and it's nice. It's refreshing to know that he wants to bring a World Series back to City Field and to Queens, and will do everything in his power, and will open up his checkbook to make it happen. I like that. Your thoughts, just your general feelings from the Wilpons to the Cohen era, and being a Mets fan. What's your outlook for 2023?
Yeah, I mean it's such a big. I mean it's like rags to riches. I mean, as a Mets fan, right? You went from having potentially one of the bottom five ownership groups in MLB to now having one of the top two or three owners in MLB, but arguably the top owner. I mean, you could say
Yep.
you know he maybe doesn't have the
And you're
history that.
being listen. I'm going to start. I mean, you're being generous with saying bottom five. I'm going to say the if we're ranking during that time period, like owners, I would want to own the Mets. I mean, the Wilpons would have been my last.
Would have been.
Last. I would have took anybody else. At that point. So
Well, listen,
you're being nice.
the only competitor maybe, and this is me growing up in Miami, was that Marlins
Okay.
ownership, and oh
Yeah.
my God,
Yeah.
what a
The fires.
complete
Yeah.
disaster.
Yeah. The
Um,
fires. Yeah.
Fire yourself, but just the
Yeah.
whole situation there is crazy. I could talk for hours about that, but yeah, okay, bottom one or two, okay. The Marlins give you a run for the money. Um, but yeah, what a story. I mean, listen, I'm as optimistic as they come. I think last year's team was amazing. I mean, it made the city. The Mets were the team, even with Aaron Judge and the things that he did last year, which were amazing. I'm not
Yeah.
taking away from that. The Mets were clearly the team that really that captured New York there for a while.
Yep.
The problem is, they fizzled out in the playoffs. The run came to an end. Um, they still have an amazing lineup. They re-signed Nemo, which I think was great. They
Yep.
got Verlander now. Um, the only thing I will say, and it's kind of for me, and it was like I don't know how to feel about it yet. Losing to Grom, okay, and I get it. Like he's injury prone. Maybe
Yeah.
they weren't going to give him the money the Rangers were going to give him, and I don't blame him for leaving, but it almost had this feeling of I don't know. The guy should have been a Met for life, and
Yeah.
almost like the legacy was more important to me than even a championship of sorts. I know that sounds crazy, but like
Yeah.
the Grom
No,
will never be
I
the thing.
yeah, I know where you're coming from. I'm a big DeGrom guy. To this day, I don't wish him any ill.
Yeah,
Like you just said, I rather be a Met than a Ranger. That just didn't work out I think some of the injuries, I don't want to speak for the Cohens or the front office brass. I think some of the injuries and what he was going to command and what he eventually got from the
Yeah.
Rangers, I don't think the Mets wanted to go there. They said they wanted him, but there is every front office has to determine where's the point where we say we can't do that and then have to look at a different direction, and that's where I will say this. I mean, you lose the ground, that stinks. I like you. I have a lot of nice Degrom stuff. I was hoping he'd be a Met for life. I echo that sentiment, but I just think the asking price and what they kind of saw coming didn't match their view, and then they went out and signed Verlander, who's he's had his own issues here and there, but I think they're more confident that he's going to probably play more. We've even seen, I mean, it's early. We've seen some issues in spring training with Degrom like not going or taking a few days off. So I think that in Cohen's quest for the World Series, he had to make a tough call. He knew it would be tough, and but I think he'd tell you if it's in the spirit of trying to bring a World Series to. He tell you, listen, we negotiated with him. There was a number we offered that we thought was fair. He got more, and he decided to go. We wish him well. That's kind of how I feel too. Like I wish he was still there, but if you ask me World Series title or out in the playoffs with Degrom, and I'm not pinning it all on one guy and say that would be
Right.
I'm gonna in the quest for a World Series. I'm gonna just have faith that I'd be a little more disappointed if they lost Degrom and didn't sign Verlander
Right.
or
Yes.
Cody Senga or do stuff that
Right.
then I'd be like, what are we doing? So I'm gonna trust the process as the cliche goes, and it's nice. Listen, that's a good problem to have, right? If you think back again, not to bring up the Wilpon days, those were problems we didn't even. We had worse problems where we just didn't sign anybody
Yeah.
or just kept the wrong guy for bad contracts. And not just Bobby Bonilla. That's just the big. That's just the biggest one we talk about. So I feel like they've really bolstered the middle of the rotation. They bolstered middle relief.
Really
Edwin
good.
Diaz looks like the closer they
Yeah.
thought they were getting when they initially did the Kellenic trade. The first year was rough, and I remember saying, "Man, I want Kellenic back if this is what you get." And now it's looking a lot, not a little bit, a lot better. So I'm confident. I did a kind of a Major League Baseball preview show. I was a homer. I picked the Mets to win the division, and that sort of thing. So we'll see. Again, I think they're going to be. I don't like to claim World Series before they happen, and I would never do that, especially with
Yeah.
with the Mets. But they got the pieces in place, right? And that's to say that as a Mets fan, right? How many years we weren't
Right.
even close to that. So to me, I'm going in optimistic. I was kind of hoping for one more outfielder, one more kind of a bigger
Yeah.
name. I like Brandon Nimmo. I think he's getting paid more than his value, but the outfield free agency was not very strong. And I think they got scared. Like if they lost Nimmo, their outfield would be even in worse shape. So if there's a weak spot, I think they could use another outfield. What I like that they didn't do, what they used to do in years past, as you well know, is trade their minor leaguers away, their prospects. We still have one of the best
Yeah.
prospect system in the game. I'm blessed here in Syracuse to see it up close and personal. I live 2 miles from the stadium. I can almost
Awesome.
walk there, and we got a lot of prospects: Mauricio,
Yep.
Alvarez, Parada, Vientos, and the cupboard is not bare like it used to be. And I'm excited as a Mets fan. I figure you feel the same way. We know we're competing for a championship, and again, after many years of that, not even that being a pipe dream, the old days of the Wilpon era, right? We're just trying to sneak in the back door for like a wild card spot. knowing that even if we got in, we weren't going to do much damage, but at least we got a
Yeah.
couple extra games. Right now, it's a different sort of feel, and just kind of your closing thoughts with the Mets. I'm assuming you probably feel very similar.
Yeah, I mean we're on par. I mean there's a couple of great teams in the NL. The
Yep,
Padres are getting Tatis back. The Dodgers are going to be the
yep,
Dodgers. They're spending just like not just like the Mets. Nobody's spending like the Mets. Um, but but I mean that's the point, like right? Like
yeah,
you feel like you're with the big boys now, and you're not just catching lightning in a bottle like we have in the past.
yeah,
You're actually building towards something. And then I'll also say like adding like an actual manager like Buck Showalter, a guy that
yep,
knows what he's
yep,
doing. That
yep.
can't be
Big
understated.
difference.
Yeah, that's a huge
Big
difference.
difference.
Hiring a couple,
Big.
uh, you know.
Yep,
So
yep. No,
the other names that
100%.
we've had some good ones. I mean, no disrespect to like Bobby Valentine, Art Howe. Those guys are very
Yeah,
well respected. But I will say Buck Showalter is kind of a little bit
yeah.
above that. Above
Yeah,
those.
the pedigree is more there than some previous incarnations of managers, and that's nice too. Knowing you got a guy at the helm that has there's nothing he really hasn't seen. He's not going to be overwhelmed in the moment. He's not, no players are bigger than him. That was some of the previous manager. I felt like the players kind of ruled the roost, and he couldn't. It's hard being a young kind of new manager and reel people in. Like
Yeah,
your voice getting heard? Showalter, calls the shots, and I think even with Cohen, even though Cohen owns it, I'm pretty sure Showalter says, "Hey, you know." You get the ingredients, but let me cook the soup, right? The old
yeah,
Bill Parcells, Bill Parcells line, right? Like you hired me as manager. Let me do what I'm supposed to do. I appreciate you get me the pieces. I'm not in, being ungrateful, but let me do my job. And I think Cohen's the type that lets him do that as
yeah,
well. So it's nice to be optimistic going into a Met season after many years of like, oh well, let's see what happens, and kind of knowing how the movie ends because we've seen it sort of before. So
yeah,
it's good. Well, Horatio, awesome you coming on, man, and we got to talk Mets, we got to talk hobby and all that. Give out where people can find what you're doing, read your stuff, see you, hear you, take your time, give out all that stuff you'd like to share.
yeah. Thanks, John. Thanks for having me on, man. I really appreciate it. I had a lot of fun, man. Just talking and the hobby, talking about sports. Yeah, so I do a podcast with alts.co. We kind of talk about alternative investments there. Just had a pretty interesting podcast with a CEO who invests in athletes, and you invest and you get a portion of their future contracts, right? So I think that was a pretty
Yeah,
cool one that I just did. And I write a couple of articles a month for Sports Collectors Daily. Really love doing that. Really that's kind of where I pour a lot of my energy into, as far as coming out with some quality content. And I'm looking forward to doing the same thing with Hobby News Daily with Danny, writing
yeah,
some really cool articles there. I know the big launch is going to come up April 1st, and
yep,
so I'm looking forward to contribute to that as well. And just I love writing. I love kind of interviewing people as well and learning more because I get to learn more about the hobby that way,
yep.
and I get to make connections that way as well. That's kind of what I'm doing right now.
Well, keep it up, man. Great stuff, and hopefully, obviously, we'll have you back on. And if the Mets win the World Series, we'll have to do like a celebratory podcast. I don't know how many other people like it, but we'll have fun. We'll have fun doing
Maybe we'll
it.
be at the game and we won't have to buy. We won't have to
Yeah,
pay for the ticket stubs. We'll have the ticket stubs.
yeah,
You know?
yeah. No doubt. Sounds good to me. So, thanks, Horatio. I appreciate it, man. Be well. Take care.
John, thanks. Same to you.